Hello, we are live and here.
Well, good morning.
Yes, okay, I'm just going to do a quick check on the sound situation just so that we don't have any shenanigans or tomfoolery.
Is the green light on?
Listen, the green light is on, and I thank you for asking because what God meant for petty, what the devil meant for petty, God used for my good.
It was not meant for petty. That was a
Oh,
legitimate
goodness.
question.
No, it really was. That's what it really was. It really was. Good afternoon, friends. Thank you all for being here. All of you who are here. If you want to introduce yourselves, please do, and we will be happy to say a hello and to welcome you properly, like we were raised with the home training that we were. Um,
You speak when folks enter the room.
right. In the meantime, we will introduce ourselves. I am Jill Bates Moore. I am one half of the Dahlia Law Group lawyer team. Dahlia Law Group is a law firm in Oakland where we do legacy and estate planning, probate, and litigation related to those areas so that this area of law can be accessible to everyone. And who are you, my friend?
I am Alicia Holland, and I am the other half of the Dahlia Law Group lawyer team. And
Excellent.
I am happy to be here.
I'm happy to be here too. How are you? How are you doing? Like how do you be right now?
Yeah. Right now I'm a little weary, but with perspective.
Mm-hmm. Say
So
more. Say more. That felt powerful.
yeah, it's still, there's pandemic, there's the racial reckoning that's happening, that all of that is happening. And then just in our neck of the woods here, we are a week into a heat wave, which means that for the last 7 days now, the temperatures have been over 90 degrees every day, which may not be a big deal to other places in the world, but we are not used to that kind of heat here. So it means simple things like most homes and a lot of businesses even don't have air conditioning.
Yep.
And so it is tough to get comfortable and to stay comfortable while working at home without air conditioning when I think on Friday it was 103 degrees. So it's just like, you just kind of laugh at that because you're like, but for real though?
Just
And
like
then this morning I woke up and came out of my bedroom and immediately smelled fire.
yeah, because
And
there are fires right now. Yeah.
And so I went to bed last night with my windows open because not fire. And overnight, 30 fires have erupted,
Yeah.
and where we are physically situated, basically all around
Yeah.
in the counties that surround us in every direction, there is a fire burning,
Yeah.
which means that we now have unhealthy air quality. So it's hot and the windows have to be closed.
Yep.
So I say, just weary of like, another thing,
Yeah.
and it's supposed to still be in the 90s for like the next 3 4 days, but
Yeah.
with perspective, because I am safe, I am healthy, I am well, all my people are safe and healthy and well.
Yeah.
And so seeing the news of people that got up overnight and left their homes with the clothes on their back
Mm-hmm.
because a fire was raging, so I have perspective about it, but just feeling a little bit weary.
Yeah. No, I
And also,
appreciate that. Go ahead. What were you gonna say?
yeah, and also a little bit steamy because for the purposes of the sound quality here, I had to turn the fan
You
off.
know what? No. I reject that. Turn that fan back on. Get up right now, please, and turn that fan on. We'll
So
wait.
make it. I have multiple beverages here. That's why the door is open so that I can get some airflow.
Mm-mm.
But
Mm-mm. Turn the fan on, friend. We'll wait right here until you do it. Please go do
I'm
that.
good for the moment. I'm good. I'm good. We're all right.
Listen, I don't want to air our personal business on this public forum, but I'm going to. I'm going to tell you, I'm not sure if we're insured for you passing out on this live stream. Like, I don't know
Then
if we're
why are you
actually
passing
covered for
out?
that.
Look. See, I even prepped for it. So I brought provisions to make sure that my temperatures would stay appropriate.
So Lisa's here, Danielle is here, Tony is here. Hello. And there are calls for you to turn on the fan. We have both a quorum and a majority on this vote. The
I
will of the
appreciate
people. The will of the people. They have spoken. The people have spoken. Like,
We'll give it a shot.
we're
Please
all
hold.
distractedly concerned about this.
Please hold. I will give it a shot. If it is too loud, though, I will turn it off because I brought the
Please turn
provision.
on the fan. Like, less explaining, more fan turning on. So while Alicia goes and turns on the fan so that she does not die on this on this live stream, I'm going to tell you what we're talking about today so that you can get your notes ready. We are talking about the basic anatomy of a trust. Once we get into that conversation, that is what we will be talking about. But right now, we are talking about how not to die during a firestorm in the Good Bay area. Tony said to put the fan on your feet. That'll help keep you cool if you can. Oh wait, I don't know if she can hear just yet. Hold on, let her get her sound back on. Okay.
I could read your lips long enough to say what we are talking about now is about how hot it is and why she need to turn that fan back on.
So I was just saying that Tony suggested that you put the fan on your feet if you can because that'll help keep you cool. Lisa has said fan on please. No
The
ma'am. We
fan
are
is
not
on.
watching you melt. Danielle has said good afternoon. Hello. And stay cool. Like there really is like, people really
I
are
appreciate y'all
concerned
looking
about
out for me.
this. And just so you know, I don't hear the fan.
Excellent.
Yeah, I don't hear it in
Excellent.
a loud way. Sean is here saying hello. Um, so
How are you after
yeah.
my fan shenanigans?
I'm okay. I woke up today, um, just feeling like there's feeling the robustness and the density of all there is to do. And so um I feel like there's this constant balancing, at least for me, around between what I feel like I should be able to do, and you know how I feel about that word. You know how I
Yeah,
feel
that's not
about
one
that
of your
word.
words.
I think that word is an act of violence. Um, but yeah, because I'm working remotely. For those of you who don't know us, some of you don't know us personally, some of you do. Alicia and I are working remotely from different locations, so we don't have access to in real time to each other, and but we are both sheltering in place with with full resources available to us. But because we're working almost exclusively from home, we go to the office to get the mail and to check in on things, and and that, but not you know not we're not really there. I mean, maybe what, like once a week.
We pass through.
Yeah. Yeah, and we do not stay long. um but uh but yeah, like because I'm in this one space and I do everything in my home, so all of my living, all of my working, all of that stuff. It has, I don't know, it feels like a bit of a balancing act to sort of mediate between these feelings of, well, you're here all the time. You should be, you should be able to do XYZ and PDQ. And so Today feels a bit like the balance might be a little out of whack, and so I would very much like to figure out a way to get it in whack, if that's a if that's a term, right?
I get it. Should needs
So
to get punched in the throat.
yeah. So, but I am glad that you're safe. It is fire season in the Bay Area. Some folks who are not familiar with our geographic area don't know that we have fire season, but we do. And everything kind of goes brown. And I mean, we expect that to happen. The hills will go brown, it'll get dry, it'll get really hot for a few weeks. But these past few years, there have been some wild and deadly fires. And I mean, every time we see these fires, we think that's a one off, right? But it has happened. The fires in Paradise were what? Was that last year or was that 2018?
That was 2018, I
Okay.
believe. Either
But
2018 or 17.
really,
Yeah.
for some reason, that
Hmm.
feels a lot closer in time to me. But in any event, the fires in Paradise that we're talking about, Paradise was a city um, in Northern California, not too far from our area, but you know, a good ways off, and fires absolutely leveled that town. I mean, the whole town ceases to exist by act of fire. Like I don't think that there was any much of
There
any
was
structures or
very
anything
minimal,
that
very few things
that
that
made it
were
out
left
intact.
behind.
Yeah.
And even like thinking about the mask that people are like, we don't like wearing them.
Mm-hmm.
It's talking about our air quality and what fire season means around here. Like the N95 mask that a lot of people learned about in this pandemic are things that we keep on hand all the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because when that Paradise fire happened, there was a good 2 3 weeks where you were strongly advised to have an N95 mask anytime you were outdoors. Because if you have ever been to a campfire or standing by somebody's grill that is burning wood, imagine air that just smells like that all the time. You smell it in the elevator shafts of the buildings when you go to work. Like, even though I got my windows closed this morning, I can still smell smoke in my house. And it's too hot to open the windows, and there's nowhere for it to
Right.
go because it's even smokier outside. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well,
And we've
and
had over 10,000 lightning strikes in the last 3 days, which is just exacerbating it because everything is hot and dry.
mm-hmm.
And we had rain the other day, but because it was so hot, most of the rain evaporated before it hit the ground.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so everything is super, super dry, which is
Yeah.
why 30 fires popped up in the last 3 days.
Yeah. And it is alarming to get up, like to be awakened in the middle of the night or to be on high alert, to have to get out of your home or wherever you're sheltering because it is not safe there, because the fire is moving faster than you. And obviously, we're still in the middle of a global pandemic, or, I mean, I guess a resurgence as numbers are going up. So it's not particularly safe to be outside with this airborne virus. So for those of you who are praying, folks, send up a prayer. And for those of you who are not, still send some energy to the folks who are impacted by this directly. It really is serious stuff. Those of us who walk outside and have ash on our cars, because that'll happen. Like ash just will sort of land on the cars. Don't listen to us. Those are complaints about nothing. There are people who are literally running for their lives and for their businesses because these fires can be very fast moving. Um, all right. Well, there's really no way to transition elegantly from that. So I'm just going to change the subject. Okay. We're just going to start talking about something else now. Um, And that is today's conversation. Today's topic, we are talking about the basic anatomy of trusts. And so, for those of you who have been with us for a minute, you will know that we are still in our sort of nitty gritty series about the estate planning tools that we use in legacy and estate planning work. Legacy is about the people. The estate planning is about the stuff and the tools that we use to accomplish and to tell the stories and achieve the goals of the people. So today's topic is about trusts. If you feel like you need to get up to speed from here, we intend this to be a standalone conversation. Excuse me. Let me start there. But if you feel like you need to get up to speed and get some language, or you're inspired to do that after this conversation, please do feel free to go back and listen to or watch the previous episodes. We are here in this live stream format intentionally. We don't pre-record these conversations on purpose because we want to be here and be available for your questions. So don't be shy with them. Go ahead and send them over. Post them or whatever, and we will address them as they come. And if it's something that we can't answer, don't worry about that. We won't be shy about telling you that we don't know. But if we tell you that we will find out and get back to you, you can trust that we will. And if you think of a question,
so we don't know right now.
Yeah, right, right.
But that won't be true always.
Exactly. So, Alicia, do you want to kick us off while I pull up my notes?
Yes.
Don't ask me any questions, friend. Don't ask me any questions. Save your judgment. Save your judgments.
Oh, I'm glad it's not just me. That's the judgment I have. I'm not alone. So where we are is just a kind of a recap of what we've talked about in those previous episodes that you might want to go back and check out. Is we have gone through the documents for what we call a personal authorization plan, which is around making authorizations for how you are cared for and how your people are cared for. We've also done a discussion on the difference between wills and trusts. We talked about that last week. And so very often people come in saying, I need a will or I need a trust, or not knowing which of them they need. And so we talked a little bit about that last week. So now today we're going to start with a deep dive into trust, which is going to take us through a few different weeks. And what we are going to talk about today is what trusts require, how you're going to set them up, and kind of the key elements of the trust, and what those key components and roles of them are something that you should know by the end of the week. And then kind of giving you the teaser for where we're headed is then in the coming weeks, we'll take a deeper dive into each of those component roles and what they mean, and you can have some more insight on, as you're making selections for the people for those things, what you should have in mind for that.
Yeah, we're not trying to bury the lead on this for you. Many of you already know that trusts require somebody to set them up. They need a trustee and they need beneficiaries. These are, as far as the roles are concerned, that's not what's required to make a trust necessarily. We'll talk about that more specifically in a second. But we thought it was important because these roles are sort of bandied about. We talk about these things in informal conversation a lot of times, and we find in this work that people don't always have a clear, specific understanding of what those terms actually mean. And it's really powerful knowledge to have because it affects how you might set up your trust. So we'll talk more specifically about those roles in the coming weeks. But first, we want to talk about what makes a trust a trust. So when we log off today, we want you to be able to identify that, right? Like what are the must-haves for a trust, and the names of those roles. We'll fill in the gap in information about the specifics for those roles in the coming weeks. So Technical requirements. I'll start with that. In
Do
order
it.
in order for a trust to be a trust, you need mental capacity to contract, right? Mental capacity to actually set up a trust. And at this point, we've talked about so many tools where mental capacity is the starting place, right? This is not going to come as any surprise to you. Number one, mental capacity. You have to do that, and if you don't, then it is possible for a trust to be set up for you, right? By order of a court, but that's not what we're talking about today. We are talking about one that you set up yourself. So, in order to do that yourself, you need to have mental capacity to set up the trust. The second thing you need is an intention to create the trust. So, there's a very real difference between me handing Alicia, which is where she is on the screen, between me handing Alicia, my prized possession this morning was my cup of coffee. So there's a very real difference between me handing Alicia my cup of coffee and saying, here you go, right? And me handing Alicia my cup of coffee and saying, hold this for me, right? And then more specifically, hold this for me and give it to my husband when he comes in the room, right? Like those are very, very different outcomes, right? In scenario number one, Alicia is going to drink that coffee. Let me just let you know
Every
that.
time.
Like, she might dilute it a little bit because I put more sugar in my coffee than she does, but no matter what, she is going to drink that coffee. In the second scenario, though, because I have expressed an intention that she hold that property for me for the purpose of somebody else's benefit or for my benefit, then she knows that it's not hers, but she has it, right? Like she has control over it, and in some way she has ownership of it to do what needs to be done with it, right? For example, to sort of beat the crap out of this metaphor, if she was holding on to it for an extended time and it went cold, she has the power to heat it up, right? And to make sure that it's ready to drink. But that's different than her taking it for her own benefit. Okay, so mental capacity and an intention to create a trust. A trust can be set up for any number of purposes as long as it's not illegal or against public policy. Like you cannot set up a trust for the purpose of kicking dogs, right? There is no legal purpose for a kicking dog trust in the state of California. It can be for animal protection, though, for the prevention of kicking dogs. It can be for charity or something like that. But anyway, you have to have an intention to set up a trust, and the purpose of the trust has to be proper. The trust has to have property. And by property, I just mean stuff. It has to have some stuff. It can be personal property stuff, like my cup of water here. It can be real estate stuff, like the house that I own. It can be business interests, like if I have an LLC or something like that, my ownership interest in my business is the stuff. And that only makes sense, right? Because a trust is we are holding stuff for somebody else, right? Or for some future purpose. So there has to be some stuff to hold. Otherwise, why are we here? Like, what are we doing?
Collapse.
Exactly.
It's like a bouncy house with no air in it.
Exactly. Yeah. So for those of you who are taking notes, we should have 3 bullet points at this point. Mental capacity, intention to create a trust for a proper purpose, and stuff. All right. The last bullet point is a trust has to have a beneficiary. It has to have somebody or something who is intended to benefit from having set up this trust. Now, if I set up the trust, that beneficiary can be me, and we will talk more about the beneficiary role, like we said, in the coming weeks. But just know that somebody has to benefit, or something has to benefit, because it doesn't have to be a human person, has to benefit from the trust. So repeat it with me: mental capacity to set up the trust, intention to create a trust for a lawful purpose, stuff, and a beneficiary. If you got those 4 things, you got a trust. Yay! Do your LeBron James chalk clap before the game, right? But we aren't here for you to do the minimum. If that's all you've got, then, I mean, all right. But if that's all you got, somebody is going to fight. That's the likelihood of fighting is actually pretty high if that's all you've got. We are here so that you can get this thing right and minimize friction and have your wishes carried out and have this tool actually do what you intend for it to do on the first pass. So Alicia is going to start talking about what you need to do in order to avoid a mess and to have this trust thing set up to work well for you. It's not a lot of stuff. Don't worry. But these are some places where you want to pay attention. So I'm going to stop talking and let Alicia take it over.
Yes. So in trying to avoid a mess, it's not a lot of stuff, and it's frankly not hard stuff either. It's just, it will minimize the fighting and the mess. And one of the big reasons that you want to minimize the fighting and the mess is the stuff that you're trying to put in this trust is subject to having to pay for big chunks of the fighting and the mess, which means it's not going to the people that you intended it to do. So let's cut off the fighting and the mess. So the very first one that you can do, write it down. So surprisingly, it's not a requirement that a trust necessarily be written down. But when we are going with the mama told me, but mama told me, and we've got to try to present our evidence of who said what when and who has better evidence of who said what when, you can see it's going to be a fight. So write it down. The next one is state clearly your intention to create the trust. So actually putting in there, I intend these things, that this be a trust, that these things be held in trust, like stating that intention and not just assuming. So for Jill's example of hold my coffee and give it to husband when he walks in the room, we can see that that is a trust based on what she wants me to do, of holding something for the benefit of someone else. But to just make it clear, write it down and write, I want you to hold this in trust and then do this thing with it, so that there's no question about your intention to create a trust here. Next one is state with specificity who or what your beneficiaries are. So it could be, if it's my children, my grandchildren, put them by name or by the class of the people that they are, but to say with clarity who you want to benefit from this trust. So even though you might know what you mean when you say, I want it to go to my people, we need to know who are your people. So who are the folks that you want to get the stuff? Who are we holding it in trust for? Then next up is we're going to identify clearly what is the stuff that we intend for this trust to own. Mm-hmm. So you'll see on television when we talk about the last will and testament, for instance, and it'll be, I want all of my earthly possessions to go to so-and-so.
Don't do that.
Please don't. It sounds real cute on TV, but it creates a mess for the people trying to deal with that. So if it is you want your house to be in this trust, or you want your bank accounts to be in this trust, you want your collection of miniature Hoozamagoos to be in the trust, like whatever that thing is, and it can be multiple things, identify them so that we know exactly what we are talking about is property of this trust. And the reason that you're going to do that is because this stuff that you want to be held in the trust is creating what is called in trust land is called funding the trust. And so what that has to do with is when we talked about we need to have something in the trust, we create it. So we write out those instructions for what we want to happen. And then we need those things to be in the trust, held by that trust, so that the person who has the job of making sure that they go to those people can have control of those things. So when we talk about that job of quote unquote funding the trust and putting the stuff in, that is something that for different types of things, it involves a different process. So we'll get into what those things are, but just to know that we're going to have to do some things to just make sure that all of these items are documented for us. Another important thing to remember when we're thinking about the stuff that goes in our trust, sometimes people will come in and say, oh, well, I need a trust, but the only thing I want to put in it is my house. Or on the flip side, they might say, I don't need a trust because I don't have a house. And the truth of the matter is that real estate is not the only thing that can go into a trust. You can put lots of things into the trust. It can be your personal property items, it can be money items, all different types of assets can go into the trust. It just needs to have at least one something in it. And then when we're talking about it, we can talk about the types of things that it makes sense to have in that trust.
Yeah, can we pause here for a second? Because this is a place where I think that people people can sometimes, well, frankly, overcomplicate this, but also like undercomplicate it, if that if that makes sense. So step back for a second and think about what you are attempting to do with this trust. Think about how this tool, how you mean for it to serve you, right? And then this concept of putting the stuff in the trust will make easy sense to you, right? So let's say that my purpose for setting up my trust is to make sure that that cup of coffee gets to my husband. Okay? This is the purpose of the tool. This is how I want this tool to serve me. All right? And after the way that we have beat the hell out of this example here on today, maybe nobody will drink coffee ever again. but stay
I
with
will
me,
still drink the coffee.
right? But so if my purpose is to get this cup of coffee to my husband, the question is very, like, the most obvious question is, well, where's he going to get the cup of coffee from? Right? If the trust is supposed to get him the cup of coffee, if my intention is to get him the cup of coffee, then how is he going to get the cup of coffee if the trust doesn't have it? Right? So that this funding concept really is as basic as that, right? A trust is able to have an amazing amount of control, and you are able to have an amazing amount of flexibility to make decisions about and give instructions about property that is owned by the trust, property that is in the trust. If that cup of coffee is owned by that trust, meaning that the trust has the cup of coffee, then I can tell that trust to do just about anything with it as long as it is lawful, right? But if that cup of coffee is not owned by that trust, then guess how much power the trust has over it? None. Not even a little bit. Like, doesn't make any difference at all. So think of that. I have done all of the work to set up the trust. I came to the live streams, I took my notes, I did the thinking work that we're going to ask you to do, and all of the things. I set up the trust, we made sure that it was right, and then I didn't put a single thing in it. And so all of these instructions are like me shouting out of a window. It's like Twitter. It's like the instructions are like Twitter. I'm just shouting out the window, and maybe somebody will hear me and maybe they won't. But I cannot
Catch
make
that sound in the wind.
yeah, I can't make a single thing happen with that trust because the trust is empty. So that's sort of the common sense sort of approach, well, not approach, but the common sense sort of context for why we're saying what we're saying about funding the trust. But this is a place where people get really confused sometimes, or get really smart and are still somehow wrong. So
It's true. And this is a place where another question that often comes up when people are creating a trust is, okay, do I need to file it somewhere or record it somewhere, or what do I need to do? Because if you're thinking about this example and saying, okay, well, I want to make sure my trust is funded, so who do I need to give it to make sure that that happens?
mm-hmm.
And the answer for that is that the trust itself does not need to be filed or recorded somewhere, but the fact that certain assets are owned by the trust may need to be filed or recorded somewhere. So a big example of where that may come into play is when we deal with property like the house, for instance, the real property. That is something that would need to be recorded with the county recorder, so that when the person that we are going to say has the job of making sure it gets to the people, when they show up and say, okay, it's time for me to do my job and I need to transfer it to the people, then it needs to be recorded that this property actually is owned by the trust, that the trust has some power over this thing. And so that's something that can be recorded.
Yeah, I think that that's an important point, and also one that's related to it is transferring ownership of different types of property, because that is what we're talking about. When we say make sure that the trust has the thing in it, has the stuff in it, the way that you get stuff into a trust is that you transfer ownership of the stuff to the trust so that the trust becomes the owner of the stuff. Okay. And the trust, remember, the trust is not a person. The trust is not an entity. The trust is the container. The trust is the container. This is sort of the legally made up box that we're putting the stuff in. Okay. But when we say put stuff in, we mean the trust owns the stuff. All right. So transferring ownership of stuff, what is required to do that will depend on what the stuff is. Right? Some stuff we can transfer ownership with a bill of sale or with an assignment. Think about the last time you bought a car or you sold a car, right? One of the things that you had to make sure that you had was that bill of sale, right? Because when you went to take that car off of your insurance or go to the DMV and say, take this registration and responsibility for this car off of me, they wanted to know what? They wanted to know proof that the car did not belong to you anymore, and who did it belong to. So for some property, you might transfer it that way. For some property, like Alicia was talking about with the house or the real estate, you transfer ownership of real estate typically by a deed. I mean, sometimes that's done by a court order. It depends on the circumstance, but typically you do that by a deed. But for other types of property, like I think I gave an example earlier about, I think I said maybe my ownership interest in an LLC or a business or something like that. Well, for those types of things, how you transfer ownership of those things depends on what the governing documents of the LLC or the business entity say you're supposed to do, right? There might be a procedure that needs to be done. Again, none of this stuff is hard. None of it has to be hard. I should say that. Sometimes it is hard. It does not have to be hard. But knowing what these concepts are just allows you to ask the questions, right? So knowing that the trust actually has to take ownership of the stuff will easily prompt you to ask the question, well, what do I need to do to change ownership of this stuff? Bada boom, bada bing, right? And then, then we get the answer to that question, we do it, and then it's done. So yeah, those two concepts are really important around the stuff. You don't necessarily have to give notice or record it anywhere. It depends on what the stuff is, but different stuff might require different steps to get it into the trust ownership.
Yep. So another thing that is not a requirement, but it's going to avoid a mess, or it's also important to make sure that what you intended can actually happen. And so typically when you create your trust, you are going to be the initial trustee. So we created this thing, we set our intention, we put the stuff in it. Somebody manages that stuff, the person that's holding it. Typically when you create it, that's you. You are the initial trustee, the person that's responsible for it. So making sure that it goes to the person that you want to benefit from it during your lifetime. So that is something that you are going to do during that initial piece of it. The thing that it's a good idea to have is to put who steps in after me, and to maybe have a person and an alternate. Because when we're thinking about a trust in the capacity that we're talking about here, when we're talking about legacy, and we talked about this a little bit last week, that you'll have triggering events that may happen for when somebody else steps in. So you become incapacitated, or upon your death, to make sure that these things are passed to the people that you've intended them to go to by way of your instructions. That person that you name for the who steps in next is a person that's called your successor trustee, the next in line person to manage it. Now, the reason that we say pick a person or perhaps two is to make sure that if something happens to person one on your list, either before you, at the same time as you, or person one on your list says, you know what, I got too much life of my own happening right now, I can't take that on, then you already have an alternate in place. Now, the reason why this lands on the to avoid a mess list, or to end up causing a situation which is the exact opposite of what you intended, is if you don't name a somebody, then what happens is your people have to go to court to have a court decide who has the power to manage the things that are in the trust on your behalf. And one of the reasons that we often create trust is so that we can keep our estate and how it gets handled out of court. Mm-hmm. If you don't name a successor trustee, then that is what is it? They call it a free ride. Well, it's not a free ride, but it's an express trip to the courthouse.
No stops.
So you are not even on the local bus. You are on the express straight to the courthouse. Now, some important things to remember for when you're picking the who it's going to be is you can have a couple of people listed as co-trustees, for instance. So when you have folks that are creating a trust together, for instance, those two people might together be co-trustees. And so you might even say in your trust, if something happens to one of us, then the other of us can continue as a trustee. But we're still going to say, name a somebody who's next in line to serve when neither one of you is in that trustee role.
Yeah, and can we stop right here for a second?
Yeah.
Because I think this too is a place where just stepping back for just a moment and just looking at the point of it all, right, will will naturally lead us to this step, or naturally prompt a question that will lead us to this step. If the whole purpose of the trust is to get this cup of coffee to my husband, and we know that somebody has to do that, right? Because the trust is not a person. So somebody or something has to do that. Then naturally, the question is, well, who's going to do it? Right? Who's going to do it? And initially, that somebody might be me. But if I've given the coffee cup to Alicia, then that somebody is her. Right? But what if something happens to Alicia? What if Alicia has decided that all of this is too much? You all can have all of it. You can have all of the United States. You can have all of the America. You can have all of the fires, all of the elections, all of the postal mailboxes. You can have all of it. I'm leaving. Good day. Then how does my husband get the coffee cup if if it's just sitting in the trust and there's nobody to give it to him? Right? This is I guess what I'm really trying to reinforce here is that this concept is a really straightforward concept. There are plenty of ways to do advanced planning and that sort of stuff, and to make a whole bunch of levers and pulleys to make this complicated. And sometimes that's necessary depending on what you got going on. But for the most part, and for most folks, this is what my granny called basic. Right? This is very straightforward, or it can be, right? If you get some good guidance that's not trying to confuse you.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Then,
Go ahead.
no, that was good. That's very good. Forward my mail to the Seychelles.
Right.
So then the last thing that's on but for real though, this is super easy and it will avoid big mess. So just do it. Sign it and date it. Like, super simple, but just do that, so that we can confirm that you actually made these things. Because remember, we said you had to have the capacity to contract, and that's ultimately what a trust is. It is a contract, and it's a goofy little contract when you think about it, because at the outset, you are on both sides of the contract. You are the person creating it, and you are agreeing to be the person that is responsible for holding and managing the things in it. And so you're on both sides of that contract. And so if you think about contracts, whenever you go, like thinking about the example Jill gave when we're buying the car, we sign some papers. So sign it and date it, so that we can identify when this trust was created, when these instructions and rules came into being. The other thing about that is that often the date of the trust is actually a part of the name of it, so that it's very clear when this trust was created. So if I were creating my trust on today, then it might be the Alicia Holland Living Trust dated August 19 would be the full name of my trust.
Okay, I'm gonna pop
That
in
would-
here with
Yeah.
I think the common sense step back is my role in this conversation today, because this one too has a very common sense sort of context, right? How many Alicias do you know? I mean, just think. I mean, I don't know how many Alicias, right? How do we know whose trust this Alicia's is, right? So identify it, sign it, and date it, right? So basic. But what it also helps to do is it marks the moment in time, so that if I know for a fact that I'm not burning bread on you, friend, that Alicia was in no way capable of signing a trust on let's say August 24th, because maybe she was very inebriated all day long. Like every day, every hour that was a part of August 24th. It may or may not have been her birthday, but it definitely was. So,
And she was in the Seychelles.
right. So,
She could not have been in California
I
signing this.
know that she did not have mental capacity to create a trust on that day. Then we already know that there's an issue here, right? It was a cheap, low tech, like super easy, and didn't even cost extra way of identifying that what could have been happening at that time, right? Like if there's a red flag or something like that. And you've seen these things happen. I know you all watch Judge Greg Mathis and the People's Court and all of that stuff, where somebody pops up with a signature on some document, and then then the witness comes in and says, well, so the person could not have put their signature on that document on that day because they were in a coma, right? Like this is that
If
basic.
you are also of the generation where you watch the soap operas
Well, Lisa was just talking
or the
about that.
stories with children, this came up a lot in the
It
stories.
surely did. It surely did. That's funny. That is funny. Okay.
Yeah, they were teaching you about trust law before you even knew what it was.
Right.
Stories are educational.
Yeah, but not completely. So,
there's
when in
that.
doubt, watch the live stream here. Okay. All right. Sorry. I know you were about to wrap up with this section.
Um, yes, let's see. Let me just double check and make sure I got everything. Oh, the last thing about the signing and dating of it is the trust needs to be signed or should be signed by the person that is creating it. Sometimes you will have property going into the trust that could be owned by somebody other than the person that is creating the trust. And so for the documents that are transferring that property into the trust, that needs to be signed by the person that owns the property. So Jill creates her trust, and she is saying, I'm going to create this trust to make sure the coffee goes into it. And then she says to me, we like your house a lot. We would like for you to put your house into the trust for it to go to my husband as well. And I say, okay, that's cool with me.
She would never say
Then-
that. She's never going to say that. This example is terrible.
We'll just stick with it.
Okay, sorry.
It'll work.
Sorry. Sorry.
So I say, yes, that works for me. And so Jill signs her trust, creating the container that is holding the things, but then the transfer of my property into the trust doesn't need to be signed by Jill for the trust to have control over it. That has to be signed by me because I am the owner. So I could still say, even though, like Jill said, like, why would this example ever happen? Why would I ever do that? It is not likely that I would say, I, Alicia, assign my interest in my house to Jill's trust for the benefit of Jill's husband. It's a thing that I could do. And so knowing who needs to sign what papers is important in order to legitimize that transfer and to make sure that it has the legal effect that you intend it to.
I never thought I would ever say this, but I really hope that my husband never watches this particular live stream. Because
He would be
otherwise,
like, oh, I got a house.
you all are going to have some awkward conversations.
Let's go about my house, though.
Right. Lisa says, why does TV betray me? My entire TV legal education has been faulty.
No, it's
And-
same with your medical education from the TV.
Right. We have a question from Danielle. Hey, Danielle. Danielle wants to know, where does the trust go? So you've done all the things you're supposed to do, but you already said that we don't have to record it anywhere. Surely we have to do something with it. Where does it go? Thanks for
Yeah,
this
no.
question, Danielle. This is a great question.
That is an excellent question. And so when we are thinking about the trust, we're giving it this big name trust, but remember, think about it's just paper. It is agreements written down on paper. So with the where does the trust go, what we're actually talking about is what do I do with the paper that says what I intend to happen here. And so the answer to that is it's actually going to be in a couple of different places. Well, it can be. So one is that you are going to put the original paper in the place where you keep your safe papers. So if you have a special safe or a drawer, a safe deposit box, you might put it in there. The other thing you're going to do, though, is to make sure that the people that you have said that you want to be next in line to take over and manage those things for you, that they either have direct access to that paper or they know how to get access to that paper. So thinking about that, it's a really important question, Danielle, that a lot of people don't think about. And so they say, great, I created it, and I have this safe that I keep in my spare bedroom or in my home office, and so I will drop the paper in the safe. But then they don't tell anybody else how to get into the safe. That is a very bad idea. We do not want to do that. So if it's in the safe, then we either need to give a copy of it to the person that is next in line, or we might give access to a digital copy to that person to let them know how to get full text of the document and let the other people know who has access, or we might give them all copies of it, or to even tell them if we want to, it's in my safe, here is how to get into the safe. Here's the combination, or here's a spare key to the safe, or I have added your name to the safe deposit box so that you could also go to the bank to get to that document. The biggest thing is don't just create it and tuck it away in for safekeeping without letting somebody else know that it exists and how to get to it.
Yeah. So I'm writing down just sort of a summary of that answer in case it'll help to read it as well. That you should, I heard you say you should put your trust papers in a safe place where it will be protected from damage. And you should also put a copy of it somewhere for your trustee to get it.
Yeah.
Got it. Got it. Got it. And Lisa is expressing so much sympathy for my husband. First, his hat, which I have pilfered. I stay in his closet. I think he might kick me out of this house at some point. But he has the patience of Job, that man. So first his hat, then his coffee. Now he can't have the extra house. Poor guy.
A cold, cold world.
It is a cold, cold world. Bundle up. All right. So, so just to close us out here, because I also want to be mindful of everybody's time, and we are approaching, just about approaching an hour now. We have talked about the requirements that are absolutely necessary in order for you to actually have a trust, in order to make that thing a trust. We talked about those 4 requirements, and I summarized those on the screen for you. So if you need to just scrub backwards or rewind to get those, please do. And we talked about some, maybe not always strictly legally necessary things to do. Some of them are repeats of the requirements that we gave, but things that you really need to do to avoid making a mess with this trust thing. And so I summarized those on the screen as well, but just for your hearing, you want to write it down. State clearly your intention to create a trust. Remember, that's a repeat of one of the requirements. State specifically who or what your beneficiaries are. Remember, beneficiaries are one of those requirements. Identify clearly the stuff that you intend for the trust to own. Remember, stuff is a requirement. And take the steps that are necessary to transfer ownership of that stuff to the trust. And that might mean doing a little bit of work to figure out what those necessary steps are. But once you know you need to do that, then you can do that research. Name a trustee or 2 to step in after you. right? So that you want to make your bench as deep as you're comfortable making it, right? Um, yes, believe in your own mortality, and so set somebody up to step
It
in.
is in fact going to happen.
Right. I'm sorry, I said name a trustee to step in after you. And then the last thing is sign and date it. Sign and date it. All right. So we will talk next week about, we'll start talking about the roles. More specifically, I forget which role we're going to start with. I think we're actually starting with the trustee role, but I don't remember specifically. We'll let you know. But we will start talking about the
Tune in
roles
next week and
next
find out.
week, right? And so for the next 3 weeks, we will be talking about those roles. We'll talk about the trustee role, we'll talk about the beneficiary role, and we'll talk about the role of the person or people who set up the trust. That's called a grantor. So tune in the coming weeks for that. Feel free. There is still time for you to ask questions if you have them. So please don't be shy about asking those questions. And then if you need to, if you think of questions afterwards, of course, put them in the comments, email us, give us a call, whatever. You can message us on Instagram or post comments there with questions in them as well. On Instagram, we are at Dahlia Law Group. And our website is dahlialawgroup.com. And Dahlia is spelled just like the flower, Dahlia. And we want to leave you with a couple of action items. These are not necessarily resources this week. What you're going to notice over the next few weeks is that this is where we really start doing some thought work. And so some of these homework items or action items are going to be answering some probing questions. So I'm going to let Alicia give you those while I look out for questions.
Yes. So, step one in your homework is you're going to think about and identify some of the assets that you would want to have in your trust. So, thinking about, okay, I've got the real estate, what accounts or financial assets that you might have. You might also be thinking about any heirlooms that you have, any family belongings. Those are things that you can put in the trust, and you're thinking about them in the sense of what are things that I have specific thoughts that I would want this to go to X, or I would want so and so to have these things. So you're going to think about the things and also think about the people that you would want to leave those things to. So as you're thinking about those family heirlooms, for instance, that you have granny's specific this, that you would want that to go to this person, but another thing to go to another person, because these are going to be the types of instructions that you are going to be including within your trust. Of the trust is holding it for the benefit of this particular person, and kind of the parsing out of who you want it to go to.
Yeah. And one of the things that a lot of times people find really helpful to at least start their thinking around the stuff here is to, I kid you not, I just talked with a client about this the other day. Go around your house. I do me stand up and walk around the place and look at the things there that have a value that is not readily apparent, right? So think of things that have a value that is not obvious. This is a legacy question, okay? This is a legacy issue. I will give you an example. My great-grandmother's cookbooks, which I lost when our house flooded, and it made me very, very, very sad. But here's why. My great-grandmother's cookbooks were the cookbooks that she used, like that I saw her with, that that we messed around with in the kitchen, and those had a great value to me, right? But I mean, some of them even had her handwriting in it, if I remember right. And these days, like, who writes anything down anymore? Like, handwriting is, I don't know, that's just so, ooh, yay, let me have it. But these are, I mean, I think they might have been like Good Housekeeping cookbooks or, or something like that. To look at them, the value of those things was not readily apparent at all, right? Similarly, her Bible, which is held together at this point with like duct tape. Like it's, right? That Bible is held together with duct tape and the grace of God. Like that's it. because, but this was the Bible that she read from every single night. And it is the Bible that I got married with. That thing, it doesn't look like much of anything, honestly. So if somebody who was not me were coming through to identify the things that were necessary to keep, or that it was okay to let go of, maybe to donate or to put in an estate sale or something like that, they would see that, or they might have seen those old cookbooks and gone, oh yeah, you can chuck those things out. But those things have a great deal of value. And just a note about value, right? Value does not mean money. Value means value. And so, whatever value is, whatever importance is to you, that's the standard to go by. So maybe that might be a good starting place to start to identify some stuff that you might want to preserve. Did I talk too much again, Alicia? I talk too much every
Time to
time.
say bye to the people.
Okay, all right. Bye, you all. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. Alicia's like, will you shut up so we can go? Sorry, y'all. Okay, bye.
See you next week. We're here every Wednesday at 12:30.
Right.
Listen,